a radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday, December 8th. Hope everybody is had a fantastic weekend. Is having a fantastic weekend. I don't know, it's not December 8th. What am I talking about? Anyway, it's very confusing. So where I am, it is December 9th indeed. It is 7:30 in the morning in Brisbane, Australia. Where you are, most of you anyway, it is December 8th and it's still Sunday and it's still part of the weekend. So the whole thing is confusing. Anyway, this is my second attempt at doing a show from Australia. We will see how it goes. It is 7:30 in the morning over here. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if the internet at this hotel will allow me to complete the show rather than stopping at 10 minutes in. Hopefully we can go for about an hour. That's about the time I have. I've got to catch a flight from Brisbane to Sydney. I've just been here in Brisbane over the weekend for a conference, an Ayn Rand Institute conference, first one ever, first objectivist conference really ever in Australia. God, hopefully that'll hold. We'll see. And it was a blast. We had about 70 people, locals. Nikos and I were the speakers and had a really good time. Great audience, great group of people attended, and I think the program was a lot of fun and covered a lot. And hopefully, this is the beginning of a kind of a regular Ayn Rand Institute presence in Australia. I think I'm hoping a number of the people attended will now join the Ayn Rand University, and we can really start building a real presence here in Australia. I'm going to try to not speak too loudly, just because it is 7:30 in the morning, and I don't know who's in the room next door. I'm sure they're not eager to hear the Yaron Brook Show, waking them up in the morning. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Obviously, a lot has happened over the last few days. In the last show I did, that only lasted about 12 minutes, I did try to cover the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. So that, I think, is up. I think it was taken down and now it's up again. Maybe an edited version of that will come out soon. But today I thought we would focus, since we're limited in time, we'll focus basically on what has happened and what is going on in Syria. We've talked a lot about the Middle East certainly over the last year, but over the last many years, certainly since 9/11, and what is happening in Syria, I think, is really monumental, and the beginning maybe of a process by which the Middle East is restructured and rebuilt, maybe for the better, maybe not, hard to tell. A lot will depend on the actions of the good guys, i.e. Israel, the United States, and to some extent, countries like the Saudis and elsewhere. So let's basically review what's happened. So during the Arab Spring, what was it, about 14 years ago or 13 years ago, there was basically launched a civil war in Syria. The civil war was primarily launched by elements within Syria associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, associated with radical Islam, who opposed kind of the secular governance of the Assads. It was also a Sunni Shiite thing. The Assad family is from the Alawite sect of Shiite Islam. It is a small minority within Syria, but it is a minority that has always held kind of the intellectual high ground. It is a minority that has always been very influential in the military. And indeed, it is a minority that has dominated Syrian politics for the last 50 years under the Assads. Not only have the Alawites taken most of the positions, high positions in the government, but also in the military. and in other institutions of the state. Hafiz al-Assad came to power about 50 years ago. Hafiz al-Assad is the father. He is he's dead, a secular leader of the Ba'ath Party. The Ba'ath Party is a fascist party modeled very much after Mussolini's fascist party. The Ba'ath Party platform is very much a copy of Mussolini's platform. Bashar al-Assad, the one who just escaped to Russia, is the son of Hafiz al-Assad, and they have ruled Syria as dictators, as fascist dictators and oppressors in brutal form against all opposition for the last 50 or so years. Now, let's be clear, the opposition primarily has been, over those 50 years, the primary opposition has been from Sunni Muslims. Syria is majority Sunni. Again, the Alawites are Shiite. Shiites are associated with Iran, with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is Shiite, but Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia, most of the Gulf states are mostly a majority Sunni. So this is a split in Islam between Sunni and Shia. Anyway, Syria is majority Sunni, and yet this minority held a dictatorial grip over them. But the majority Sunni, the dominant players within the majority Sunni coalition, if you want to call it, were Islamists, jihadis, Muslim Brotherhood. And indeed, in the late 1970s, there was a rebellion against Hafiz al-Assad from the north, from the same area where the rebels now attacked and ultimately took over Syria, from Homs. Homs is a city to the north of Damascus in the northern part of Syria, which the rebels took just a couple of days ago, and then after that, the road was open to Damascus. Anyway, in Homs, in the late 1970s, there was a rebellion against Hafiz al-Assad, and by the Muslim Brotherhood, local Muslim Brotherhood. Assad basically flattened the city. Accounts vary, but anywhere between 10 to 40,000 people died in Homs in Hafiz al-Assad's attack. He was, as we said, a brutal dictator, and one who was very much opposed to Israel. He was the one who participated in the 1973 war, and also was very involved in the various civil wars in Lebanon, including in fighting Israel in 1982 in Lebanon. Bashar al-Assad was a son, and when he first took the reins, there was a lot of hope that he would be a moderating liberal force. He had been educated in the West. He had many Western mannerisms. And there was real hope that he would be a moderating force in Syria. He was not. Again, a brutal dictator. And in 2011, with the Arab Spring, when people started demonstrating in Damascus, primarily for more freedom, more liberty, more elections which probably would have brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power, Bashar al-Assad crushed those demonstrations and basically launched Syria into a civil war. At this point, the civil war, the people opposed to Bashar al-Assad basically fragmented into many groups. The Muslim Brotherhood is a significant group, but basically the Muslim Brotherhood is the underlying Islamist group from many different groups that hate each other and despise each other. For a while, if you remember, ISIS controlled much of eastern Syria and controlled much of Iraq. ISIS was beaten back primarily by the Russians. So one of the elements to bring in here is that during the civil war, when Bashar al-Assad seemed like he might be losing, he created two alliances that ultimately resulted in him being able to survive until now. One with the Russians. The Russians basically came to the rescue and brought in their Air Force and combat troops on the ground and basically beat back primarily ISIS and destroyed the capacity to attack Bashar al-Assad and basically stabilized his regime. The reason the Russians came in is because Syria is perfectly located for what the Russians want. The Russians have lost really much of their influence in the Middle East. They used to be, during the Cold War, very influential in the Middle East. They were the dominant player in Iraq, in Syria, for a while early on in the Cold War in Egypt. But they had lost all that, and they came back as a foothold in the Middle East into Syria after the Civil War broke out. But they also had a strategic interest. Syria is on the way to Africa. It is a it is a way station for them. They have a lot of interest in Africa. They still do. But also, Syria provided the Russian Navy with basically a port in the Mediterranean. Syria has no other presence really in the Mediterranean. NATO does. NATO has ports all along the Mediterranean, potentially, and NATO countries all along the Mediterranean. And yet the Russians had no presence. So they established a port in Latakia in northwestern Syria. And there's an Air Force base there. There's a port there, and this was the deal they cut with Assad. We get to use these facilities indefinitely, and we will help protect your regime. The second alliance Bashar al-Assad established during this period, in trying to protect his regime and trying to fend off the Sunni rebels, the civil war, was with Hezbollah and really with Iran. Think about 9/11. After 9/11, Iran basically came to dominate Iraq. This is the great success of the United States in bringing democracy to Iraq, was basically handing Iraq over on a silver platter to the Iranians. I would argue the U.S.'s main enemy in the Middle East. So Iran had a presence in Iraq, and Iran also had a presence in Lebanon through the Hezbollah, which it has supported since the 1980s, early 1980s, and helped establish the Hezbollah in the 1980s. Getting Syria sits between Lebanon and Iraq, was a major coup for the Iranians. That is a deal with Bashar al-Assad that allowed them to transport troops, arms, weapons through Syria all the way to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Was an enormous coup for the Iranians. It basically allowed the Iranians to dominate the entire Fertile Crescent, from Lebanon through Syria, through Iraq, all the way to Iran itself. And Iran, during this period, in the 20-teens, became the dominant power in the Middle East, other than Israel. And it not only fueled the growth of Hezbollah, it fueled the success or the preservation of the Assad regime. It fueled the various governments in Iraq, and then, of course, it expanded into the Houthis in Yemen. And Saudi Arabia felt like it was surrounded. In the north, it had Syria and Iraq. In the south, it had Yemen. And also, of course, fueled Hamas in Gaza. So this was an era of peak Iranian influence. Hezbollah, in return for the ability to travel through Syria, and the ability to really dominate Syria and to be the main force within Syria, the Iranians provided the Assad regime with troops, basically Hezbollah. Hezbollah had thousands of fighters in Syria. They helped in the civil war. They crushed the rebellion. And for a while there, Bashar al-Assad looked quite comfortable. Indeed, until a few days ago, Bashar al-Assad looked pretty comfortable. He dominated central Syria. His forces controlled much of Syria, all the way up close to the Turkish border in the north. Some to the east, although eastern Iraq was, to some extent, was controlled by the Kurds. Northeastern Iraq was controlled by the Kurds, who were affiliated with the United States. But again, there were territories controlled by other parties other than the Assad regime. But they were relatively small, and they were deemed relatively weak, and all these forces were splintered. There's about 20 different opposition forces out there in Syria, and they were deemed as weak because they disagreed with one another pretty much on everything. Some of them were Islamists, some of them were more democratic, some of them were moderate Islamists, some of them were ISIS. ISIS still has a presence there. So, you had this situation until a few really days ago where Hezbollah and Iran and Russia were propping up the Assad regime and basically held at bay this array of disparate opposition forces that were sprinkled all over Syria, in the north, in the east, and in the south. So that was the situation until a few days ago. A force in the north, an Islamist force in the north, but a, quote, moderate Islamist force, a splinter group from ISIS, whose leader used to be a senior commander in ISIS and splintered away and has supposedly moderated and aligned himself with the Turks, have been weaponizing themselves over the last few years, have been organizing, and have also created over the last few months, reasonable relationships with the other opposition forces, the other splinter groups that are all fighting the Assad regime. And on the 27th of November, they launched an attack in northern Syria, basically within days taking the largest city in Syria, Aleppo, in the north, and then starting to sweep to the south. The Kurds in the east took this opportunity to basically expand their influence on eastern Iraq and northeastern Iraq, and they basically now control almost all of Syria. They basically control all of eastern Syria, which is all desert. There's nothing there, but they control basically all of it. In the south, some of the opposition forces, again, this woke them up, and they started fighting and pushing back against the Assad regime, to the point where, as of yesterday, a few days before yesterday, they took Hama and then Homs, where the famous attack by Hafez al-Assad in the 1970s occurred. They took Hama and Homs, and ultimately yesterday they entered Damascus. Bashar al-Assad was forced to flee with his family. Reports are that he has been granted asylum in Russia and that he is now in Moscow, which makes complete sense to me. In the meantime, Russia has evacuated its ports. It has basically loaded up whatever ships it had with anything that it could and gotten out of there. They have, for the most part, evacuated the Air Force Base and tried to get as many troops out. But the reality is that Russia is out of Syria. It has lost its dominant position in Syria. This is a major blow to Putin and a major blow to Russian prestige and Russian influence in the world. And as of 2 days ago, Hezbollah fighters were running away from Syria. They were trying to escape into Lebanon. Supposedly, Israel was bombing their retreat routes and trying to kill and destroy as many of them as possible before they reached Lebanon. So Hezbollah was abandoning the Assad regime and escaping. Iran cut a deal with the rebels to evacuate its personnel and the militias that are associated with the Iranian regime. Iran had significant forces inside Syria, both to supply Hezbollah, but also as a potential threat to Israel. All of those forces have been forced to leave Syria and return to Iran. So what you have right now is rebel forces controlling all of Syria. Nobody knows what happens next because, again, these rebel forces don't like each other. They have very different ideologies. They have different visions of the future of Syria. Many of them Islamist forces, so they're a kind of crazy religious, anti-Western, really dangerous forces, and it's hard to tell what their agenda is going to be exactly. Do they want to establish Sharia law in Syria? Are they willing to have elections? if you have election, who wins? It's not even clear who would win such an election, given the split. It very much appears like Iraq, the anarchy and mess that is Iraq, but with one difference, and that is that the Sunni Shiite split is less of an issue in Syria. The Sunnis dominate. In Iraq, it's 55-45, 60-40, something like that. It's very close. In Syria, it's not even close to that. So again, it's hard to tell where we go from here. But there's a number of, I'd call it a big picture issues that big picture issues that are worth pointing out. Troy Beaton, who was supposed to be at the Brisbane conference and was a no-show. Troy, I was really looking forward to meeting Troy, and he had family obligations and couldn't make it, unfortunately. So I'll have to come back to Australia to meet Troy another time. But Troy, as you know, one of the most consistent and best supporters of the Yaron Brook Show over the last few years, really since 2021, has just given 500 Australian dollars. Thank you, Troy, again. Again, I hope I finally get to actually meet you in person on a future trip to Australia, or if you come to the United States, we'll figure this out. Anyway, as I was saying, a few big picture issues that I think are really, really important. One related to the past and one related to the future. So we'll get to the future in a second. Why did this happen? How did the Syrian regime collapse so quickly, so thoroughly, so systematically, with almost no opposition? And I think here, the Syrian regime has collapsed as a side effect of Israel's actions in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran, and as a side effect of the Ukrainian war, of the war in Ukraine. I think it's really, really important to note, and this is, I think, goes unappreciated by people primarily on the right, I would say, in the United States. But the reality is that the war in Ukraine is a massive, massive drain on Russian resources. Russia has taken massive losses in Ukraine. Some estimate 600,000 or more troops have been killed or injured in Ukraine. It has cost their economy a huge amount. Again, there are a lot of Russian apologists and a lot of just ignorant economists who are claiming that the Russian economy has done fine. It has not. It has been devastating for the Russian economy. If you measure Russian economy as the standard of living and quality of life of ordinary Russians, this has been devastating and still ongoing, and it's getting worse and worse. Inflation is very high. Interest rates are at around 20%. There is no entrepreneurial activity in Russia. There's no economic growth, not real economic growth. There's only economic growth in the sense that the Russian government is spending a lot of money, primarily on defense, primarily on destructive activities. But as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, Russia is in no position to help Syria. It doesn't have the resources. I think a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, certainly 4 years ago, Russia would have come in to help the Assad regime with significant force. They would have used the Air Force as they did in the 20-teens to crush the rebels, to destroy their cities, to kill as many of them as possible. And Bashar al-Assad would probably still be around. So there's no question in my mind that what the Ukrainian war has done is dramatically weaken Putin, to the point where he cannot come to the defense of one of his closest allies, where he has to retreat in shame. Russia can do nothing to save Syria and has done nothing to save Syria. They just don't have the capacity. They don't have the ability. And that is pretty shocking and unexpected, at least by those people who don't fully understand What is going on? Are we there, guys? Okay, we are there. Yeah. So one important outcome of this is to show us the real weakness of Russia. Now, note that most people out there are giving credit for the Syrian regime collapse to Trump. Like everything good that happens from now on is because of Trump. Trump has nothing to do with this. If any, it's Russia is weak not because of Trump. If anything, Russia is weak because of Biden, but not weak enough. Biden was weak, but by the fact that Europe and Biden actually stood by Ukraine is what caused Russia to be weak. Trump has nothing to do with this. Arguably, maybe Turkey is supporting this whole move, and Erdogan is supporting this and trying to get as much of it done before Trump gets into office. Not clear why. Last time Trump was in office, Erdogan of Turkey basically had him wrapped around his finger and doing what he wanted. In a famous phone conversation, Trump basically abandoned the Kurds to the Turks and said, "Do what you will with them. We're going to retreat and not support our allies." So I don't see any connection with Trump with what is going on in Syria. I'll also add that this is all really caused not only Russian weakness is one of the reasons why Assad has been defeated so easily and thoroughly. But the real reason, the fundamental reason, is the weakness of Hezbollah and the weakness of Iran. What Israel has done to dismantle Hezbollah, to destroy its capacity for war, to destroy its rocket reserves, to destroy its entire leadership, could just annihilate its entire leadership, to destroy its bases in southern Lebanon, but also bomb every facility that the Hezbollah had all over Lebanon. And one would note that over the last few months, Israel has been actively bombing inside Syria. They've been bombing various weapons facilities, research facilities, chemical weapons facilities. They've been bombing Iranian troops in Iran. They've been bombing Hezbollah in Iran. They've been bombing, in Syria. They've been bombing Syria constantly, weakening Bashar al-Assad's allies in Syria. And as a consequence, if Assad's dominant experienced military force was Hezbollah, well, Hezbollah was not capable of fighting on Assad's side because of what Israel had, the degree to which Israel had weakened it, not only in Lebanon, but in Syria itself. And of course, its other ally, the Iranians, have been weakened dramatically. Not only has Iran lost its capacity to defend its airspace because Israel has destroyed its air defense capabilities, but also their ballistic missile construction, building facility has been destroyed. Their capacity to wage war has been weakened dramatically. And they are just not in a position to help Bashar al-Assad because they are worried about the Israelis because of what Israel has already done to them and what Israel could potentially do to them. This is a massive failure for Iran. So if you will, we'll get to the future in a minute, if you will, what we've just seen is a major setback to two of the axis of evil. This is a major setback for Russia, and it is a major setback for Iran. Iran has lost its capacity to transfer weapons, troops through Iraq and Syria into Lebanon. The Sunni, Islamists are not friendly to Iran. They're not sympathetic to Iran. They don't like Hezbollah. They've been fighting Hezbollah. They don't like Shiites generally. So this has weakened Iran. It's hard for me to tell you how much it's weakened Iran. It's huge. Not just the collapse of Syria, but the fact that what Israel has done to Hezbollah. Iran has lost its capacity to project force to the Western Middle East. In other words, to Israel. Remember, and here it's worth just illustrating this point, right? On October 6, 2023, the day before October 7th, basically, Hamas had something like 40,000 fighters, thousands of rockets, hundreds of miles of tunnels and bunkers. The entire Gaza Strip was a war staging area. And they had massive support from Iran, from Qatar, from UNRWA, and they were entrenched in Gaza. Their leadership was in Qatar, and they were getting ready for major war with Israel. Hezbollah had tens of thousands of fighters, many of them in Syria, supporting the Bashar al-Assad regime. They had some 180,000 rockets and missiles. They had tunnels all over southern Lebanon, including cross-border tunnels that could get them into Israel. Southern Lebanon basically was a staging ground for them to be able to invade Israel, harass Israel, destroy Israel. If Israel ever went after Iran's nuclear program, it would face 180,000 missiles potentially launched from Hezbollah, Lebanon, into Israel. So Iran had an ally to the north of Israel, threatening Israel with a major force, 10,000 fighters in Hezbollah. These were well-trained, battle-ready, battle experienced. They had fought for many years in Syria, so they had this experience, right? Assad was firmly in control of Syria's key cities, Damascus, Homs, and the whole the coast of the Mediterranean. He had the support of the Russians. Russia basically provided him with air defense systems. It also provided him with airplanes, he provided supply lines to Beirut. He had the support of Iran, Hezbollah, Russia. It didn't seem like he was going anywhere. Yes, he had ceded part of Syrian territory to these opposition groups, to these militant Islamists, but they did not pose any real threat to him. And of course, Iran dominated the northern Middle East, other than all the way from the Turkish border down. They seemed to have surrounded Israel, and they were in a great position. They had aligned themselves also with Russia. Remember the alliance between Iran and Russia. They had just received sanction relief from the Biden administration, so they had money. And they were progressing with a nuclear program, and they were sending gazillions of dollars to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to the Syrian, to the Bashar al-Assad regime, including, and of course to the various militant groups within Iraq that report to Iran. Look at it today from that perspective. Gaza is basically in ruin. Hamas as a military force has been crushed. They have no ability to fire rockets or function as any kind of military force. The leadership of Hamas in Gaza is mostly dead. Its Qatari leadership, some is dead. Hania, for example, or others are facing expulsion probably to Turkey. And I think everybody realizes what UNRWA is. Whether they'll do anything is a different question. Hezbollah has been decimated. Its entire leadership structure has been crushed. Its base of support in the Bekaa Valley and in southern Lebanon, as well as southern Beirut, have been largely destroyed. Its bunkers underneath civilian population in southern Lebanon have been revealed and crushed and destroyed and exploded. The prestige they have, this mighty fighting force, has been shown to be a paper tiger. The Radwan force, which is supposed to be this tough Hezbollah force, has been to a large extent decimated. They have lost their position in Syria. They've had to escape. They've lost their position in Lebanon. They are a weakened force. Of the 180,000 missiles that they have, hard to tell how many are left, but probably only 20%, maybe less. Hezbollah's position, even in Lebanon, has been weakened dramatically, and many people within Lebanon are now talking about dismantling Hezbollah or dismantling its military capabilities. The Assad regime is in total collapse. The Iranians have turned tail and run away. and Hezbollah has abandoned them and tried to escape into Lebanon. Iran itself has been shown to be a total paper tiger. Israel basically has shown that it can dominate the airspace in Iran. It has completely crippled its Iranian air defense system. Basically, Israel can target any place in Iran and destroy it. Iran is as weak as it has ever been since the revolution. It really has nothing. Now, Israel's not in a great position and hasn't really dealt a death blow to any of its enemies, not to Hezbollah, not to Hamas, and not to Iran yet. But the reality is that evil is impotent, evil is incompetent. If you think about Russia, the same thing. Russia is bogged down in Ukraine. It has taken devastating losses. Its economy is in shambles. And now it has lost a major ally in the Middle East, and it's not clear what its relationship with Iran can be moving forward, what Iran has to actually contribute to Iran. And, I think at the very least, the Trump administration coming in will impose much tougher sanctions on Iran. Russia might benefit from the Trump administration, but Iran probably will not. We will see. This is stunning. In a year and a half, basically, the entire Middle East has changed. Now, in terms of Israel, Israel is very worried about what's going on in Syria. And we'll get to Iran in a minute, but it's very worried about what's going on in Syria, primarily for a number of reasons. Bashar al-Assad kind of was a status quo that was kind of comfortable for Israel. He did not, while he facilitated Hezbollah and while he facilitated Iran, he himself, Syrian forces, did not engage in warfare against Israel. These radical Islamists who are now taking over Syria, different situation. They might be much more hostile to Israel. They might present a real threat towards Israel. Bashar al-Assad had vast quantities of chemical weapons, for example, but he never used them on Israel. He used them on his own people, but he never used them on Israel. Who knows if these stores of chemical weapons fall into the hands of the Islamists, if they would use them against Israel. Israel just doesn't know who is going to replace Bashar al-Assad and how hostile they're going to be to Israel. They're all going to be hostile, but how hostile? The Kurds are the only ones who would be friendly, but the Kurds will not dominate. As a consequence of this, Israel is doing a number of things right now, as we speak, in Syria. Israel right now is striking targets all across Syria. Its air force has basically completely dismantled whatever anti-aircraft batteries the Syrians have, and they have free reign over the skies of Syria. And they're attacking basically any Syrian military facility that they believe has any level of sophisticated weapons. Missile depots, rocket depots, chemical weapons depots are being attacked. They are flying, everywhere in Syria, and they are attacking. Now, of course, by doing this, they also are creating airspace for them to then one day attack Iran if they need to. But in the meantime, they're basically dismantling the capacity of the rebels, of the Shiite rebels, to gain any kind of sophisticated weaponry and chemical weapons from the Assad regime as they win. So Israel is currently actively engaged in dismantling and ridding Syria of the kind of weapons that they worry about. At the same time, Israel is creating an additional buffer zone between it and Syria. Israel has actually entered into Syrian territory, into what's called the demilitarized zone, just outside the Golan Heights. Earlier today, as far as I know, they took the Mount, God, what's the name of the mountain? It'll come to me. Anyway, the one mountain where it snows in Israel. Part of that mountain is in Israel. Part of that mountain is in Syria. They have taken control of the entire mountain, and now control the heights. They have also created a buffer zone of the Golan Heights, entered into Syria and are in a position to protect the Golan Heights from these entering from these groups that are taking over Syria. So Israel's taking active action. You will probably see Israel taking more active action in the days to come. Mount Hermon, thank you. Mount Hermon, which saw some pretty brutal battles in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And now Israel is taking command of the entire mountain. I think there are pictures of Bibi Netanyahu on the mountain delivering a talk to the Israeli people from the Syrian side of the mountain. So Israel is definitely proactively entering Syrian space and doing what is necessary to protect itself while it sits back and waits to see exactly what happens in Syria and which group comes to dominate. All right. So that's kind of where we are today. Everybody's going to wait to see how these various Syrian groups deal with one another. What is the next stage? Is the civil war going to continue as they fight for power? Or are they going to compromise in some kind of coalition government? Are they going to call for elections? There's a lot of unknowns about what comes next in Syria. But here is what I think the U.S. and Israel should be primarily focused on, and this is the biggest risk of the current situation. I believe that what has happened here over the last, really since October 7th, has really put the Iranians into a corner. Iran is devastated. The power it has today versus what it had a year and a half ago, it's a different universe. They are now weak. They are poor. Their military is being shown to be a paper tiger. Their allies have been decimated. Their influence is unbelievably weak. Iran could very well come to the conclusion that their only path forward is nuclear weapons. In the past, they've kept weak nuclear weapons as an option for one day. Because they were so strong, they didn't feel like they needed it, and they knew that if they developed them, or if they came close to develop them, the West would really come down on them, would criticize them dramatically, as would many others in the Middle East. Now they're cornered. They have no bargaining chips. They have no leverage. They're like a wounded, cornered animal. And when they are in that situation, it's likely that they revert to, the last option that they feel that they have, and that last option is nuclear bombs. If Iran has a nuclear bomb, it is a game changer in the Middle East. They can do what they want. They can escape scrutiny. They cannot be really attacked, and nothing really can be done to them. So I think the biggest risk right now is Iran accelerating the development of a nuclear bomb. Supposedly, they're only days away. Days. Are we on? Just want to make sure that I had something here crash. I want to know. Looks like we're on. If somebody in the chat can just say if you can see me and hear me. Iran supposedly is only days away from enriching uranium to weapons grade. They could do that within less than a week. Then it's a matter of getting the uranium into into a weapon. There's every reason to believe that they can do that. So we could be days to weeks away from Iran announcing that they have a nuclear weapon. Now, this is the real test. This is the real test of Netanyahu. This is the real test of the American government. Both Democrats and Republicans have said they will never allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Well, it might be now. It might be now that action has to be taken. Otherwise, it'll be too late. Otherwise, Iran will have nuclear weapons. So, in my view, Israel's failure, I mean, Netanyahu's pathetic failure over the last few months to deal with the Iranian nuclear program, the opportunities Iran has given him to take out the nuclear program, and he has done nothing. Somebody asked me if Netanyahu has exceeded expectations. In some realms, he has, but mostly he has not. Mostly, I still believe Israel, particularly with Hamas, with the ceasefire with Hezbollah, and with the not touching Iran's economic or nuclear programs, continues to be weak and continues to give an opening to the bad guys to survive somehow. Israel has had this amazing opportunity, not only to take out Hamas, they've mostly done that, but to completely destroy Hezbollah, to completely change Lebanon forever. It didn't do that. It chose to go for a ceasefire instead. Israel has had the capabilities and the excuse and even the international cover to go to Iran and basically destroy its capacity for war. And its capacity to develop nuclear weapons. And again, disappointing. Even with Hamas and Gaza, I've said this 100 times, but I guess I have to say it again. What Israel did in a year and something of battle, they should have been able to do in 3 months. They should have been able to do in weeks. They didn't do it in weeks. There are heavy, heavy costs that they will pay for not having done it in weeks. What they did to Hezbollah, much of it is amazing, but they stopped. They needed to do a lot more, and they should have done it a lot earlier. I mean, there's so much that could have been different. There's so much that could have been different. But so is my opinion of Netanyahu changed dramatically? No. And let me add that most of what was done here by Israel would have been done by any Israeli prime minister. I don't think Netanyahu did anything spectacular. I don't think he's did anything unique. I think some Israeli leaders would have been better, some would have been worse, but generally Netanyahu is nothing exceptional when it comes to dealing with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. And I think in all cases he dealt with them too moderately, too weakly, and stopped too soon, particularly with Hezbollah. The ceasefire agreement from a week ago, 2 weeks ago, was pretty pathetic. The key here, I think, to emphasize is Iran's building like crazy right now, moving towards nuclear weapons. Will Israel have the courage, have the audacity to go and destroy the capacity to do so? Can Israel even do that, given these weapons are being built deep underground? If Israel cannot, will the United States do it? Will the United States under Biden do it? Will the United States under Trump do it? Will waiting for Trump be too late because it's a month and a half away, and yet they might be closer than that to building a nuclear weapon? So the next few weeks are going to be super interesting and exciting and scary in terms of Iran and watching Iran and what it's doing vis-a-vis the nuclear power, its nuclear plans. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Now, I only have 10 minutes, so many of these questions, including questions from last show, I will have to postpone and do another time. Maybe tomorrow. I'm going to do a show tomorrow if the hotel Wi-Fi will allow me. So let me do a few quick questions here. Liam says, perhaps the failure of October 7th, the destruction of Gaza, the elimination of Hezbollah, the impotence of Iran, the election of Donald Trump will ensure many Arab and Muslim population to move in a Western direction. It is possible. It is claimed that is what Saudi Arabia wants. It itself supposedly is moving in a Western direction, and it will inspire others. That is possible. We will have to wait and see if that actually happens. Remember that the forces capturing Syria right now are not forces that are pro-Western. These are Islamist forces These are barbaric forces. These are forces maybe not aligned with Iran, but they are aligned with the worst elements within Sunni Islam, and Sunni Islam is bigger than Shiite Islam. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see Saudi Arabia's role in what happens in Syria. Saudi Arabia presents itself as a moderate Sunni nation. It supports some of the moderate forces within Syria, but the moderate forces are not the ones that made most of the gains. Most of the gains were made by the more extreme and religious forces. So how Syria all shakes out is hard to tell. I'm skeptical about movement towards the West. I am much more likely that Syria becomes a kind of a mess, an anarchist kind of mess. It's divided into many tribes. It is not a threat to Israel because they're too busy with each other. And it's hard to see what the unifying force is ultimately going to be in Syria. It also means that Turkey now is much more powerful in the Middle East. Maybe we are seeing the descent of Iran, but the rise of Turkey. Turkey has ambitions to recreate the Ottoman Empire. At least Turkey militant Islamists have that ambition. This is one step in that direction, and Turkey's influence is going to increase, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. Remember, Turkey is a member of NATO, but it also Erdogan just the other day called for the end of Western civilization and the rise of an Islamic civilization. So while he's a member of NATO, he's very much undermining and believes in undermining the values of NATO. He should be kicked out of NATO, should have been kicked out of NATO a long time ago. I doubt Trump will kick him out of NATO. So, it'd be great to view all this as kumbaya and this is going to be amazing and the Middle East now is going to change in fundamental ways. Not as long as Turkey's there, not as long as the Muslim Brotherhood still dominates much of the Sunni world. Saudi Arabia has become a moderate force, but only a moderate force. Vis-a-vis in comparison, and only a moderate force as long as the current crown prince rules Saudi Arabia. If he's assassinated tomorrow, who knows? Saudi Arabia could be in play. Egypt, of course, who knows what's going on in Egypt? Egypt has a massive military equipped with best American weapons. What does Egypt want to do? What direction does Egypt go? Egypt is still a very poor, corrupt country. Sisi and the military, they have not solved the problem of Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood is still strong in Egypt, even though they're under the surface because it's illegal to be a member. It's still a dramatic, massive mess. Michael says, will I answer the questions from the show that went 12 minutes? Yes, I will answer all the questions. They're all here. I have them all. I'm not answering now because I'm trying to just stick to this topic right now, but I will cover all the questions asked today and asked a few days ago on the show. So that is my intention. Let me just quickly go through this and see if there's any other questions. Not Your Average Algorithm the other day asked, did World War III already start? It's just materializing gradually. I don't think so. And I want to emphasize this again. The axis of evil as is presented today, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, is weak. It's weak. It's not in a position to actually engage in World War III. Russia's a disaster. China's economy is really, really struggling. North Korea is really a non-entity from any real perspective other than the ability to send cannon fodder to Russia and to build, projectiles. But and Iran, as I said, is now at the weakest point it's been maybe since the revolution started. So no, I don't see World War III as starting. Michael asked, will Biden or Trump get the credit for the fall of Assad? I don't see how Trump can get the credit for the fall of Assad. Trump has done nothing. The anticipation for Trump to become president has nothing to do with Syria and has nothing to do with any of this. So no. I don't think Biden will get the credit either, though Biden, at the margin, deserves a little bit of credit for both supporting Israel and Ukraine. Basically, who should get the credit for the fall of Assad? It's Israel. It's Israel's weakening Hezbollah. It's Israel's weakening of Iran, and Ukraine standing up for Russia and therefore weakening Russia and make it impossible for Russia to devote the resources to saving Assad. Let's see. Neocon says Ukraine, Israel, and Turkey led to Assad's downfall. Yes, but Turkey's not the good guy here. Turkey is a very, very dangerous player, and we shouldn't celebrate the fact that Turkey did this. But yes, Turkey is what emboldened these Sunni fighters to attack and ultimately led to their victory. They trained them. They helped them along. They provided weapons. It's Ukraine and Israel that have basically weakened the allies of Assad to the point where he collapsed. So I think it is primarily Ukraine and Israel. Enric says, what does Turkey want to achieve with Syria? I mean, ultimately, Turkey, are we frozen? One, two, three. You guys, can you guys see me? I can't tell if you guys can see me or not. One, two, three, or if I'm frozen or not. You're live. It says I'm live. Okay. So I think Turkey wants influence. Turkey wants to reestablish its dominant influence in the Middle East. It views itself as an Islamist state. It views itself as a state that has the potential to dominate the entire Middle East, as the leader of the Sunni Islamist forces in the Middle East. And Syria is one step in that direction. They want to have significant influence. They'd love to rule Syria. I don't think they quite can do that, partially because they're a NATO member, which constrains them, but they would like to have as much influence as they can. Syria, they'd like to have influence in Iraq. They'd like to eviscerate the Kurds. They'd like to ultimately dominate the Sunni world. Has Bibi exceeded expectations? Yes, that doesn't make him good, though. He's exceeded, but not lived up to what I think should have been done. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that. Jacob says, if you divided up the Middle East post-World War II, how would you have carved up the region? Oh, I don't know. That is a big question. I'd have to really think about it. Very, very difficult question. Partially because, and it wasn't after World War II, it was post-World War I that the Middle East was carved up. It's because there are no liberal, in the positive sense, freedom-loving elements within the Middle East that could have been leveraged to make the Middle East better. It didn't happen more after World War II. It happened after World War I, of course. I don't know, but the way it was done was artificial. The way it was done was the British basically making promises to various families. Certainly in Syria, in Iraq, and in Jordan, it was not done organically. It wasn't done by looking at those countries and finding political forces within those countries that could be stabilizing or could be pro-Western. It was instead bringing in people from the outside, primarily from the Arabian Peninsula, from Saudi Arabia, and imposing them on these countries, which landed up backfiring. One last point I remembered because I mentioned Jordan. Israel has one more really, really major interest with what is going on, and that is that whatever happens does not spill over to Jordan. Israel has peace with Jordan, supposedly. The king there, he's not exactly pro-Israel, but he's at least not hostile to Israel. Jordan, without the king, is again a hub of Islamism. Remember, the enemy is Islamism, and Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and ultimately, long-term, maybe Saudi Arabia and Egypt become Islamist. That is much more dangerous to Israel than Iran. So Israel has every incentive not to allow the Islamist forces to spread into Jordan. They will not allow a civil war in Jordan. If there is a civil war in Jordan, Israel will fight on the side of the king. That is, Israel will defend the king of Jordan. If Syrian forces try to invade Jordan, Israel will destroy them. So there is a explicit or implicit deal between the king of Jordan and Israel that Israel will protect him and will defend him, primarily from these, horrific, disastrous Islamic forces. Okay, we'll call this a day. I have to go and pack and get ready for my flight. I'm flying to Sydney. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow. I have the time to do the show tomorrow. The challenge, of course, tomorrow is going to be the internet. It's the same hotel I had a problem last time. So I'm hoping that this time the internet, I'll have a different room, and I'm hoping this time the internet will hold. It won't collapse on me after 12 minutes. We will see. In the show tomorrow, I will answer all the questions I did not answer today, including questions asked today and questions asked a few days ago. And of course, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions anew, and we will cover a lot of the other stories that are happening in the world and in the United States that I've not had time to talk about. Again, I want to thank Troy for 500 Australian dollars and blowing through our target today. I really, really appreciate that, Troy. And thank you to all the other super chatters who participated. I apologize for not getting to all your questions, but I promise I will do that. They're all saved. They're all here. And I will do that tomorrow if everything works according to plan. Tonight, I'm giving a talk in Sydney. And tomorrow night, I'm giving another talk in Sydney. Tonight, it's on Israel. It's in somebody's house. It's not in a public venue, I think. And tomorrow, I'm doing something on capitalism in the pub. So if you are in Sydney and you'd like information on either of those talks, check out my website, yaronbrookshow.com. If you'd like to become a supporter of the Yaron Brook Show, please do so on Patreon primarily, but also on PayPal, Patreon or PayPal. Luke says, will the talks be uploaded? I don't know. I think the talk at the pub tomorrow, the plan is to videotape it. I'm not sure about tonight. The talks from the conference this weekend were not videotaped. If you are unhappy about that, complain to the Ayn Rand Institute. One thing was videotaped. Something I did was videotaped, so that I will put up. I can't remember which one of my talks was videotaped. One of them was. And I am putting up, you probably have seen a couple of talks from Oslo. We will be putting up, and we did put up the talk from Dusseldorf. I did put up my 10 minutes from Cambridge, and I think I'm still waiting for video of my talks in Lisbon and Porto. Lisbon maybe, Porto we didn't videotape, but from Lisbon to put up as well. So slowly we'll put up a lot of the material that we produced during this trip. So you will get video of all that on the Yaron Brook channel. See you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Sunday. I will start my Monday by going to the airport and catching a flight to Sydney. Bye, everybody.